Hey, it's Michael, and I have a question for you. What story do you tell yourself in your mind about who you are? Welcome to the follow-up question. I'm your host, Michael Ashford. Come with me on a journey as I explore how we communicate well. What we have been taught about communication and what has been modeled and incentivized through culture has left us in a place where we know how to exert our ideas and opinions and beliefs onto each other, but we miss the entire other half of conversation, the extraction. My aim with this show is to bring you perspectives and ways of looking at issues or topics that perhaps you haven't considered before, to teach you how to ask curious questions, how to seek understanding over certainty, how to listen and give space, so that ultimately you might become a better communicator. I'm a former journalist who believes everyone has a story to tell, and it's only when we ask questions and listen that we reveal what connects us as humans. Our dreams, our desires, our experiences, our ideas, and what we stand for rather than what we are against. Take a moment and think back to your childhood. Did you have a favorite playground? What comes to mind when I say the word playground? For many years of my childhood, my family and I lived in a house that backed up to a park, and the amount of time that my sisters and I and our friends spent in that park, oh my goodness, the hours are too numerous to count. When I think of a playground, that's where my mind goes. My guest on this episode equates conversation to being on a playground, where there is humor and joy, curiosity, exploration, and yeah, some arguments and some hurt feelings, and feeling bold enough to invite others onto our own personal playgrounds requires us to first uncover some things about ourselves and how we wish to interact with those around us. You're about to hear my conversation with Dr. Corey Yeager, a licensed marriage and family therapist, as well as the psychotherapist for the National Basketball Association's Detroit Pistons. Doc recently released a new book called How Am I Doing? 40 Conversations to Have with Yourself. In the 2.5 years I've been producing this podcast, I've learned that effective communication begins when we first ask questions of ourselves, then we ask questions about others, and then finally, we go and seek out others to ask questions of them. You see, how we talk about ourselves in our minds and how we understand our own needs and thoughts directly affects how we show up in the world. And as you'll hear Doc describe in this conversation, before we can begin to understand others and communicate effectively with others around us, the other people on the playground, we have to first have a level of awareness about ourselves that unfortunately very few of us pour much effort into achieving. And that's why Doc wrote his book, to give you a starting point to learn how to ask yourself the questions that will inform your ability to interact appropriately with those around you. I'm going to guess I'm one of the few people who know that it's pronounced Arkansas City, not Arkansas City.
What? How you do that? Okay, that's a beautiful way to start. How did you know that?
I'm from Kansas, and I actually, right out of college, I almost took the job as the sports editor at the Arkansas City Traveler, the newspaper there. I actually ended up at the Emporia Gazette instead, but I interviewed in Arkansas City.
What? Oh my God. Everyone says Arkansas City. And actually, after a while, you just say, okay, I'm not going to correct them because they're just going to keep doing it. But when people get it right, it makes you snap in like, so you know something.
Yes, I do.
I love that. That's a great beginning connection. I like that a lot.
Love it. Yeah, when I saw that, I knew I had to start there. But so let's take it to your book. How Am I Doing? 40 Conversations to Have with Yourself. You relate in your book conversation to being on a playground. and the we're all trying to figure things out. We're laughing. We're there may be some tiffs and some fights, but we're figuring things out as we go along. I'm curious, Doc, is there a playground in Arkansas City that you're thinking of when you wrote that?
Yes. So I grew up right down the street from Adams Elementary. So the elementary school I went to, I was literally a block away, and there was a playground there. So when I say playground, I often that's what comes to mind is Adams Elementary's playground with they had the monkey bars and the slide and the basketball court. Anytime I say the playground when I'm talking about therapeutic endeavors, that is the playground that comes to mind. Now, the secondary playground that comes to mind is Wilson Park. Right on Summit, there's a big train in Ark City, and Wilson Park is another place that I think of when I think of the playground. So yeah, those two spaces come to mind anytime I kind of mention that or bring that forward. Yes.
When did you then begin to relate conversation to that childhood experience of being on the playground? I think everyone could probably go back to a playground in their mind and know exactly what you're talking about. When did you begin to relate those experiences and tie them together as you have?
I think it was later on after I'd been in the therapeutic work for some time, before I really started saying, it feels like I'm in the playground. Once you invite me in and we start to really go back and forth and do work together, it feels like we're in the playground. So I think that was kind of after a number of years of kind of being in that therapeutic world is when I started to connect the two dots. Like, oh, we're playing. Now that you've invited me in, we get to kind of dance back and forth. That playfulness reminded me of being in that playground. So I think that's kind of when it was. So it was later into that therapeutic work.
Doc, why a playground? Why not some other analogy that you could make? What is it about the playground experience, as you write in the book, that is so easily transferable to conversation? And I'll even add in the layer of that childlike experience of the playground.
Yeah, I think that we all can relate to or have had that playground space in our lives at some point when we were younger. Just like you asked me, what playground was I thinking of when I brought it up? I think most people can associate with that. So when I began to write the book and I began to think about that association, I thought of, okay, what are things that people all can kind of relate to or engage with or understand? And also on top of that, I'm a metaphorical therapist, so I like the metaphor, right? I think the metaphor is extremely important. Anytime I can give you a metaphor that explains how I see the world, you should tune into that. Pay particularly close attention to the metaphor that people are using because that's how they're seeing and understanding things. So that playground is connected to that metaphorical way I see the world. And I think that it's easier for us to really kind of extend ourselves and make people understand us through the metaphor. So that was the connection.
So let's go there. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by conversation is like a playground? What do you want people to take away from that?
I want people, when I think of conversation being like the playground, first of all, I think of it as your playground, and I'm asking you to invite me into it. So if it's yours, you get to pick who comes into your playground and who's not coming in. So in that therapeutic endeavor, I'm asking to join and asking you if I can come into your playground. Once you say yes, now you get to show me around your playground. You get to say, hey, come over here. There's a seesaw over here that I really like, and I want you to get on. I want to enjoy this with you. I don't really go on that. It's been over there. It's part of that big train. We don't really go on that though, but it's in my playground, but I don't really engage with it. So then I get to be curious. So you don't like the train? Did you ever like the train? Right? You can see where as you show me around your playground, I can be curious about it. I can engage. I can ask questions. I can play. We can also, as I say in the book, you can stumble and scratch your knees up on the playground. So it's not always 100% fun and joyful. There are moments, just like in therapy, that are tough, and that you can walk away not feeling the best, but that you will go back to the playground again tomorrow or next week. So I think that, and again, it reminds me, even as I say it now, it reminds me of the importance of that metaphor in my life, that the metaphorical way of being just makes sense to me. Doesn't mean it has to make sense for everybody else, but it makes sense for me.
Doc, why did you write a book about conversations to have with yourself?
I think it was missing in the lexicon. I don't think no one was really and truly diving into conversations to have with self. I think too often in our lives, no one has discussed how we can hold conversations with ourselves. Actually, if you ask people, I ask people this a lot, do you talk to yourself? And they look at you like, no, I'm not supposed to do that. But the fact remains, Michael, that as I'm talking right now, you're talking to yourself. What's my next question going to be? Do I agree with what he's saying? Oh, I went by that train in Arc City. Maybe I'll bring that question back up. This whole thing is going, there's a dialogue that's going through your mind that you're having a conversation. So it's not as if some people do it and some people don't. We all do it, and we all do it all the time. The only time you're not having a conversation with yourself is when you're speaking out loud. It's the only time. All other time you're talking to yourself. So given that, we know that would be deeply important. That means I talk to myself hundreds and thousands of times more than anyone else in this world ever could. So if I'm not tuned into that, then it can be very negative. If I'm not aware of that conversation, it could be happening and be very, very negative. So I want us to be more engaged with that. I want us to have a deeper understanding of what those conversations sound like. And if we start to recognize and realize that they're negative, we can do something to move that negative self-talk to a more positive space. And you can't really do it unless you first are aware of it.
I don't remember the train in Arc City, but I remember the train in Independence, Kansas, not too far away from there. So I think like every small town in Kansas has a train.
Yeah. There's one in Independence?
Yeah, there's one in Independence for sure. Or there was when I was a kid.
Well, this in Wilson Park is on Summit Street, the main street. And it's a huge, huge train that you can't miss it if you drive down Summit. And Arc City is known for this train. So it always comes up. It comes up in my conversation all the time.
That's wonderful. I love that. You brought up, I agree. We're all talking to ourselves all the time. You brought up the negative self-talk. Why does it seem that we default internally to negative self-talk?
Yeah, I think that the default is oftentimes driven by society. Society kind of tells us how to operate without telling us how to operate. That makes sense. So it's what society informs us at a level below consciousness. So you and I are having a conscious conversation. We know what we're saying. We're here and on a conscious level. But there's also a whole nother level that's occurring for both of us. That your questions will be driven by your subconscious. You won't really even know it. And my answers and my anticipations will be driven by a subconscious. But I won't really be clear on it or won't really know it. So I think that understanding that this subconscious and these lower levels of conversation are occurring is really important, first and foremost. And then once you know that they're occurring, what do we do with them? Is really what the book is about a lot, is not just working to understand ourselves, but taking that step before that precedes understanding. And I think this is an important space, that what precedes understanding is first awareness. Can't understand you, Michael, if I'm not aware of what you're even talking about. I'm not, so I have to be aware. All right, okay, I'm now aware that I'm having conversations with myself. And now I say, holy moly, that's really negative. Like, I tell myself how stupid I am and how dumb I am when I make mistakes, and I wasn't even aware of that. To that point, once people start to become aware of their negative self-talk, one thing that I ask them is this: if you took that negative conversation that you have with yourself and handed it off and told someone to repeat those words to you over and over, would you remain friends with them? You probably wouldn't. You'd say no, because they started saying things like, you're stupid, you're dumb, you don't pay attention, you're never going to be worth anything. If someone was saying those words, we would say, get this person away. But we do it to ourselves all day. All day. All throughout our lives, we tell negative stories over and over and over to ourselves. And becoming aware and then hopefully making a shift from there is really what the book is about, and what I hope people will take away from it.
How do you see that affect then our outward actions and talk? How is it affecting people? You work with, professional basketball organizations, so obviously there's a sports side of it too. But I'm curious, how does this negative inner self-talk and not asking ourselves these questions to dig a little bit deeper, how does that influence how we show up in the world?
I think that both the negative and the positive self-talk influence our everyday approach. And kind of how we see the world. So if I'm continuously beating myself up and being negative and telling myself the story of, Corey, you're not going to be successful, Corey, that you're stupid, Corey, you didn't do that right, then the chances that in my day-to-day approach, in my day-to-day life, things aren't going great increase exponentially, because I'm always telling myself this negative narrative. So the story that I'm writing that I'm not even aware of is negative. So if I'm writing a negative story about myself, the chances that negativity show up in my life increase. But I also believe that if it's positive, if I find the way to begin a venture of positivity in terms of how I talk to myself, then things in my life have a much better chance of being positive, right? So recognizing that, and then moving it in such a way, once we understand it, and moving it in such a way that we see it as beneficial to us, will impact our day-to-day approach. The realistic aspects of our life that we live every day can be impacted by understanding that negative and that positive self-talk.
How do we, let me see if I can word this question, how it's rolling around in my mind. How do we match the flip in talking about ourselves in a more positive way to ourselves? So the positive self-talk versus the negative. How do we make that feel more authentic in how we then show up? The reason I'm asking this question, Doc, is I'm thinking, okay, if all we do is just say, okay, I'm going to switch to inner positive self-talk. How do we make sure that feels authentic and that it is something that is now reflective in our outward action, that it feels like something that it's not just we're masking something, but that it is actually something that we believe and we're diving into to try and improve ourselves? How do we do
what
that?
I would say is that I don't think that just changing the words in your head would necessarily be effective.
Okay.
That I think that you have to first say, I think that this is a stepwise approach, that anything that is worth doing and worth understanding is probably not easy, and it doesn't happen overnight. So the first step is saying, okay, so what does it sound like? What is the conversation in my head? What do they sound like? I'm not trying to change anything first. I'm just trying to tune in. Oh, man, I am negative. Okay, so now I'm aware. Then I can start to be curious with myself of, all right, so do I like that negativity? I don't think I like that. Jeez, I really don't like that. That's not good. Doesn't feel good. Doesn't sound good as now that I'm tuned in. So now that next step is, all right, I think I'm going to start to recognize ways to impact that. And I'm going to try to work to be more positive in certain situations, because what you'll find is situational negative self-talk occurs. So if I'm at a meeting and I happen to have 2 or 3 slides that I have to present at a meeting, and it doesn't go great, I'll beat myself up over that in my self-talk. I'll present, and even as I'm presenting, I'm like, I'm screwing up, dude. You're screwing up. You're not doing this right. You're not doing this right. Now it's over, and I sit down, and there's 20, 30, 40 more minutes in the meeting, and I'm beating myself up silently. God, you were screwed up, and everybody thinks you're stupid, and all. So once you can recognize that and say, I'm not going to do that. Okay, in my meetings, I'm going to start to really focus on staying positive with my self-talk. I'm going to really focus on that. Now what you've done is be genuine in your approach. It's not just something to do. It's really focused and honed on, all right, this is where I noticed I was really negative. I don't want to be really negative in that space anymore. So now I'm going to start to take bite-sized approaches to being positive instead of negative in those moments. And then what you'll realize is, as you go into meetings, you're now more aware. I'm not going to beat myself up. I'm going to present. I know my stuff. I'm going to do what I have to do. But I'm not going to, and if I screw up a little bit, I'm all right with that. So now already I've changed. Seeing what we've done is impact both the self-talk inside and our actions outside. Just in that little understanding, we've now shifted it. So you can imagine if you start to take approaches like that, and even now all of a sudden you're different in your meetings, you may then say, I wonder how this self-talk thing works for all the other parts of my life. Oh, now I'm open to, I need to pay more attention to this because that stuff may work, right? Now you expand it. Now all of a sudden, that echo chamber of negativity is starting to be filled with more positiveness. Doesn't mean you're always going to be positive 100% of the time. It doesn't work that way. But I want to be less negative and more positive.
Is the problem of negative self-talk something that is getting worse, staying the same as you've experienced it over the course of your career? Where do we stand with that?
No, I think that especially in the last few years with COVID and the isolation that came from COVID, right? We were forced into almost like a self-isolation. And there was tons of negativity that occurred there. My God, will we ever get out of this? Is the world coming to, is this how the end of the world, right? All kinds of things ran negative through our minds. So I think we probably moved in a more negative self-talk space over the last few years. That doesn't mean we can't pull ourselves out of that. But I think that we probably have started to do more of that negative ruminating over the last few years. And that's my hope, is that we can start to kind of tune in and check in to where we all are individually in terms of this self-talk and start to shift it, right? So if you start to pay attention to your self-talk, and we're in the same social network, and I start to pay attention to my self-talk, and we both begin to shift it, and everyone else in our social network begins to do the same work, we can start to move the needle, right? Little by little. And I think a mistake that we make is hoping that we could change the world. Wow. We don't need to change the entire world. I need to help move my social network, right? That's a less daunting task, to move my social network, to be curious with my social network, the people that I engage with and that I love and care about. I think that's how we change the world little by little.
So I want to set up my next question, Doc, by going back to the playground and outlining a couple scenarios here, or experiences. I think as a kid, we remember that playground as we discussed earlier, and a new kid comes to the playground and we invite them to play a game with us, and we're running around, we're having fun. Yeah, we might scrape our knee and go to our parents, but then we're right back in the game. It's energy, it's fun, it's exciting most of the time, and it's inviting, I would say. As a parent, and I don't know if you have this experience, but I go to a playground now and I see the parents ringing the outside of the playground on their phone, not engaging with the world, not even engaging with their children for the most part. And the playground experience seems very shut off from the outside world. To relate this back to our negative self-talk and the questions that we need to ask ourselves, Where does that experience happen, where we look at the world through the eyes of a child? I don't know too many children who have negative self-talk, but then we have this attitude as adults. Where does that transition and switch happen for us? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, I think I'm grabbing what you're putting down there. I think this really speaks to usually at the age of, I don't know, 12, 13, we're told to stop visualizing, stop being imaginative. We have this world in front of us. You're going to be in high school soon. Your grades will count. It's going to matter. So we kind of shut off the imagination and put it on the shelf at that age. And I think that transitions us into much more negative. That's where I think that negative stuff begins to mount up for us around that time frame or around that age. In terms of just thinking about that playground, and I like how you kind of framed it, because I saw a picture when you said, around that playground, the parents aren't really engaged. They're standing outside. They're on their phones. Because I saw that visual, and we've all seen all these playgrounds, and that's really kind of the case, which is a sad space. But I also realized too that all playgrounds are almost shut off from the outside world anyway. Right? That my playgrounds we didn't care what was going on outside of the playground. It was really, what was important is what was happening inside that space. The people that I had invited in, and the opportunity to move and play, that's all we cared about. So we almost intentionally shut all of that out. Not intentionally, because we didn't know what we were doing then, but we paid attention to one another and what we were enjoying, which I think is the beauty in that playground framework and that playground understanding is, to some degree, nothing else matters. So if you invite me in and we start to play, nothing else really matters until, in the time that we're going to be here to play, we've tuned everything out. And I think that's a good thing. So kids probably aren't deeply paying attention to mom and dad out here on the phone when they have all their buddies in here and they're playing. They don't, mom and dad, you guys do whatever. This is my world, which I think is a good thing. And it allows kids to hold on to that imagination and play.
The question that comes to my mind, Doc, is you've written a book about questions to ask yourself and digging into our own negative self-talk. How or when do we invite others then into our playground, into our notions of ourselves and how we talk about ourselves, to get that perspective, to ask for their feedback? Is there a right time or place based on your experience where that makes sense?
No, I think that that's pretty individualized. I think each individual's got a different almost methodology or timing mechanism that they abide by. So whatever makes sense or feels best for the individual, I think, is kind of how it moves. But I think one of the things that we must do, and that's kind of what the book is asking, is make sure that we invite ourselves to our own playground. That I need to play on my playground before I say, hey, Michael, I got a playground, come in. Then I need to experience it for myself first. I need to move around to all the different opportunities in that playground, and I need to know where the pitfalls of that playground are before I invite any of my friends or buddies in. So I think that's really what the book is saying, is know self first before we invite others, before we engage others and want to share all of these things. We must first figure out who it is that we are, what it is that we enjoy, what we despise, and why we despise it, before that invitation for others can go out. And that's why I say in the book, when I talk about the playground, I get excited when people finally do invite me in. I like that. And one of the questions that I would ask you if you invite me into the playground is, so show me around. What do you know here? What's good? Where are the pitfalls? And sometimes people don't know. And then I would encourage, hey, you have to do some of your own work first before you invite too many people in. The tough part about that is by the time people are talking to me, they've been inviting people in, but they still don't really understand it themselves for many, many years, right? So that's why we end up having a lot of work to do, which is what I enjoy.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I want to read you something that really was profound to me that I highlighted in the book, that just stuck out, just flashing lights when I read it.
Mm-hmm.
In my practice, I often notice roots of anxiety and depression originating in those tumultuous teen years. It's also when many individuals begin developing passive-aggressive behavior because they realize aggressive behavior won't be tolerated by the adults in their lives. Even being direct is often met with discomfort. So many people start developing a lack of clarity, especially in stating or even being aware of their own needs. Whoa, Doc.
Mm-hmm.
Is that not, and this is a little bit of a leading question, you can disagree with me, is that not the problem that we're facing today as a society? That lack of clarity, that lack of even understanding what we truly need as people, that is then coming out in passive aggressive behavior. Is that it?
Yeah.
Did you just find an
Yeah.
unlock?
Well, I think that this lack of clarity, and that I think the struggle in it, Michael, is that we don't necessarily believe that we lack clarity. We almost think that we're clear. This is right. This is really the depth of that. Is if you ask and engage people, they're like, "No, I have a lot of clarity about a lot of things," but you don't really, not really. You don't have, and you lack a hell of a lot of clarity about yourself, who you are in the context of others. You don't have clarity around that, right? So once you could prod into that space, this lack of clarity rears its ugly head much more often than not. And that's what this passive aggressiveness, which is tougher for me to understand passive aggressive behavior because I grew up in a very tight knit African American community. And I think one of the things that the African American community has never been able to afford is the luxury of kind of dancing around things and leaving them out there. And I'll be passive aggressive and hopefully you'll get the point. It almost never is really, like, we haven't really had the time to do that. Like, we have so many things coming at us. I don't have time to be passive aggressive. We're oftentimes very aggressive. I mean, I'm not dancing. My wife and I, my wife is Jewish. I'm African American. My wife understood deeply passive aggressive behavior. Deeply. She knew how to use it. She knew what it looked and felt like. And then she began to use it with me. And it was tough because I'm like, well, you didn't say that. I'm supposed to just know that? I don't know how that works. Well, you got to tell me because right? So now all of a sudden passive aggressive and aggressive came to a clashing halt. And we began to understand each other much better. But I do believe that we should be searching for clarity in so many spaces. Search for clarity, right? It's not like clarity is just going to smack us and we're just going to be clear about everything. We have to look for it. And this is where the curiosity in the book calls for. It is asking us to be curious with ourselves. Just like we're curious with others, be curious with yourself. Gain clarity about who you are and how you got to be there. And if you can do that, you'll show up in the world as a better version of self. But I do think, to your point, this lack of clarity piece is rearing its ugly head, and it's causing lots of problems for all of us.
That clarity with ourselves, I gotta believe, brings with it or has to come alongside it a lot of honesty with ourselves. Mm-hmm. How do we become more honest with ourselves, Doc?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think before you can be honest, there has to almost be this ability to reconcile. All right, there's a version of me that I haven't really come to know and understand. I have to kind of reconcile with some of that. I don't think that we necessarily seek or want to be honest with ourselves because whatever that man or woman in the mirror spits back to me, that's going to be honesty. And I don't know that I'm really prepared to hear and deal with that level and version of honesty. I don't necessarily think I'm ready for that. So we'll avoid it. So we'll avoid the mirror. We'll avoid getting to know who we truly are. at the core, at the essence of self, we become avoidant of that because it could be quite painful to be honest with self. So don't do it. Avoid it. I submit that honesty is really speaking to the core truth of who we are, and we need that, even if it's uncomfortable, right? That I would say that any version of discomfort or pain, oftentimes, not any, but most, pain and discomfort is an indication of growth. If you're feeling uncomfortable and you're feeling some type of pain, that could be very well indicating that you're growing into a new space. So as opposed to just feeling that pain for the sake of pain, let's feel that pain saying, oh, that's telling me that I'm growing. Or when my sons used to come to my room telling me at 10 years old, I'm 6'3", 300 pounds, big dude. My sons at 9, 10 years old would come into my room saying, Dad, my knees are killing me. Yeah, but you want to be big like Dad, huh? Yeah, I do. That's telling you that your knees are pulling apart and that you're getting bigger. So you don't have to just be upset that the pain is happening. That pain is telling you something, son. That's a good thing. It may not feel great, but it's a good indicator. And then they could deal with it much easier. It was much easier for them to deal with. And then they would come to me like, Dad, I must be growing because my knees are killing me. But I'm growing, right? So even understanding that juxtaposition, that reframe of pain and how we see it is a really important piece of honesty that we should have with ourselves.
Why was it important for you to craft the book as, and I love this, obviously this being the name of the show, the follow-up question, why was it important for you to craft the book as a book of questions rather than just statements that we should explore? Why questions, Doc?
Yeah, statements are all knowing. And no one knows any. You don't know. I surely don't know anything about you, Michael. But I can help guide you into some spaces where you can be curious. Questions are about curiosity. So for me to stand on, well, this is what you should do, and instead of asking if you like to win or if you hate to lose, that you should like to win. And here's the reason that, no, we don't need people lecturing us. I don't need that. No one needs that. We need people to assist us in that space of being curious to better understand who we are. And I think that's where the questions are rooted and is in that level of curiosity. I was not going to make any statements, but I would make a hell of a lot of questions and curiosities that make people say, that's a great question. Jeez, I haven't thought about that. That's exactly what I want to elicit. That moment where we say, I haven't thought about that. Right, now it's happening. Well, right there. That's exactly what I want the book to do. Right? Whatever comes after that is exactly what the book is for. I haven't thought about that. Boom. Fill that blank in. That's what the book is for.
For the folks who begin to ask themselves questions and start to address that inner dialogue, what do you suggest people do when the answers that they're getting back from themselves start to challenge the way they were raised, start to challenge their belief systems, start to introduce this cognitive dissonance of, well, I've always thought this thing, but now I'm not so sure, and this thing over here is telling me something different. What do you suggest people do to begin to face that level of discomfort?
Yeah, because that's going to happen. When you start to ask yourself, all right, where did I get these value systems? Do I still agree with the value systems that I was given at a young age by my grandparents and my parents? If I really sit with some of that, I could say, I don't know that I agree with that stuff anymore. Some of those things I don't agree with. And that's going to be tough because it almost feels like you're being a traitor to your upbringing.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
It does.
Exactly.
But we then must ask ourselves the next question. What is more important? Me showing loyalty in a space where I know I don't believe in it anymore, but I'm going to show loyalty there, even though I know I don't believe in it. or being true to who I now am? Which one's more important? And we get to ask and answer that question. And sometimes we'll say the loyalty is more important. It is. It's just more important. I don't want to cause the confusion and the struggle between family members and all that, so I'm just not going to do anything, even though I don't believe it. I'm just going to move along with it because it just is going to be easier. But now, just like cognitive dissonance being the cousin of implicit bias, that implicit bias is moving and having biases that you're not aware of. It's happening at a level below consciousness. Cognitive dissonance is saying, yeah, I'm aware of it now. Now I'm battling. Now I'm fighting in my head with, I got information that tells me that what I was taught about that is not true. But my people live and stand on that. So what am I going to do with it? Because it's no longer unconscious, no longer implicit. Now that's what cognitive dissonance is. I would hope that we can find the gumption to invite this dissonance in, because it means we're growing and that we're aware. But just be clear, any level of awareness or consciousness that we arrive upon means you never get to turn it off. You get cognitive dissonance, it's not going anywhere. You're not going to turn it off. And you sometimes would wish. That's why I think we oftentimes wish and hope that we didn't have information, right? They say ignorance is bliss. That's not just a statement. That's not just some phrase that's giggly. If you're ignorant, you can be blissful. I can laugh and giggle, and if I'm not aware and I'm ignorant to some things, it's easy to be blissful. But if I become aware and I have this dissonance that's battling in my head, it's not quite as funny anymore. I'm not quite as blissful about that situation because now I'm aware of something I wasn't aware of previously. Now I get to do something about it, right? I get to make a choice.
So what's the payoff then? What's the payoff for asking ourselves all these uncomfortable questions and exploring our own playground? What's the payoff for us?
Freedom. The freedom of understanding self. It is freeing to know who I am. Now, that doesn't mean all aspects of that knowing will be fun and beautiful. There will be aspects of that make me struggle and cry. But it's also freeing in knowing who I am. And asking these questions and holding this level of curiosity allows for me to be freed up to say, I know who I am now. If I look back 10 years ago, I didn't really have much of a relationship with myself, and I didn't really know who I was. I'm now there. I now know who I am. And I get to move in this world knowing who I am, not wondering or guessing and knowing everyone else in this world better than I know myself. That no longer is the case. Now I can move in a way that feels much more freeing. And I think that's what I would hope. That's what we want as human beings. We want to feel free, right? We want the weightiness off of us. We want that light feeling, and I think there's a lot of work to get there. So it will feel more burdensome as you go through the freeing process. If that makes any sense, as you go through the process to free yourself, it will feel more weighty because now you become more aware of things and you have dissonance and all of these things are happening. It's a lot to fight through, but I think if we can fight through it, it feels really good on the other side. That's what I'm always searching for.
So 2 questions come out of that. The first is, who are you, Doc? Like, what have you learned? You mentioned the last 10 years and truly understanding and knowing yourself. Who are you? What has that change look like?
I think over the last probably 15 years, I went from thinking that all I really had to offer to this world was my physical sense, right? Big dude, football. Once football was over, I became like a private security. And then I worked at Ford Motor Company using my body. It was all physical. That's what I thought I had. Until my wife kind of prodded me and I went back to school and then found out, I think I have some things upstairs that I don't think I realized I had them because I never really exercised that muscle much. Why would I? If I'm going to make millions of dollars being a pro athlete, why would I go to class and philosophize and think about psychology? Why would I do that? There would be no point. So I think I really grew into having an understanding that I have a lot more to offer than just my physical sense. I think has been extremely freeing for me to come to this understanding. And what really it has allowed me to do is feel like that I have things to offer to my sons and young men in my community, that I feel like I have some wisdom to offer. So it's freed me up to be of support and be in the lives of young men like me. At 15, I lost my dad. So I grew up from that age all the way to now not having a father. And many of the young men that I've worked with don't have father figures. So it is now that understanding, that freeing, has allowed me to be, I'm never trying to replace anyone's dad. That's not my job. But I can be one hell of an uncle for a lot of kids. And that's what I call a lot of kids my nephews and my nieces. So I think that is really what it has allowed me to do. That freedom, that freeing process has opened up opportunity for me to be really more in tune with who I am and what I have to offer others.
And that sets me up perfectly for the second part of this question. You work with professional basketball players. You work with the Detroit Pistons organization in particular, as you mentioned in the book. For those men who their livelihood is their physical gifts and their talents, what does this process do for them? Does it make them a better basketball player? What does it do for them to truly know themselves outside of that world of, I'm a basketball player and I make money at this and people watch me and love me? What does it do for them?
Yeah, I think it does an array of things. One, it can help them on the court. Knowing who you are more readily allows you to be a better teammate. That you can be a better connector. You can be in better connection with the players on your team. It can allow you to. There's a question in the book. What can you do in 23 seconds? Well, that came from me watching basketball. I watched the guys over and over get fouled, and then show up at the free throw line to shoot free throws. Well, that was about 23 seconds from the time they got fouled to the time they shot the free throws. But they weren't doing anything with that time. So me saying, hey, you want to slow down. Hey, you want to get your heart rate down and all those things. It came from me kind of tuning into that basketball world. So I think that they can get some things specifically that will help them on the court. But more than anything, our GM at the Pistons says it all the time, and our head coach, that we draft good men, good character-filled men that just so happen to be great basketball players too. So it helps them just like it helps everyone else. In my mind, that this book will help a lot of people. It helps them get in contact with who they are, better understand themselves, and they can then be a better father, a better husband, a better brother, a better son, by knowing who they are, freeing that process, and moving with that freedom. I think it can help them in a multitude of ways.
It's beautiful. I love that. Love that so much. Doc, what's a question that you wish you were asked more?
What was a question I wish I was asking more? When will we be fitted for our world championship rings at the Pistons? I wish I was asking that question more. If I was asking that question more, it means we won it, baby. I wish I was asking that question. No, that wouldn't be it. Why? It sounds silly, not silly, maybe shallow. I don't know. Why is it that we cannot just, as human beings, all get along regardless of any differences that we have? Why in the hell can't we figure this out? I just don't understand it. It seems so stupid to me. And I don't think that we're bright necessarily. Human beings are not that bright. I'm just being honest. I don't think we're that bright. I think we've figured a few things out, but I think we think we're much smarter than we are. I think we could learn a hell of a lot from the animal kingdom. If we paid attention more readily to the animal kingdom, they probably have it down much better than we. But that's the question. Why can't we figure this out and not be so stupid? Maybe partially stupid, but not so stupid. I think that's Michael. That's what I mean. You asked me, I told you.
I love it. I get the best answers to that question, so I love it. There's no wrong answer to that question. That's beautiful. That's yeah, maybe one of these days humans will get smart enough to figure out how to talk to animals, and then we can ask.
Yeah, hey, there you go. That's what we need, Michael. That's what we need. That's right.
Well, Doc, thank you so much. I enjoyed reading the book. Like I told you before we started recording, I highlighted it. I've got notes. Definitely going to use it moving forward for me. I love the question number 11 that we didn't get to. Do you know how to battle? I encourage people to go check that out and read through that section. That's really important. But how can people connect with you, get in touch with you, find the book?
Yeah.
Where can we go?
Yeah, you can find the book really online at Amazon, all kinds of sellers. You can find it at a multitude of spaces. You can find me if you Google Dr. Corey Yeager, if you Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, Dr. Corey Yeager. Not tough to find me. So I hope people enjoy the book. I have enjoyed writing it and look forward to whatever's next.
I will link all that up and make sure people have one-click access to it. Doc, thank you so much. This has been great.
Thanks. Appreciate it, Michael.
That was such a fun conversation with Doc Yeager there. In case you didn't catch on at the beginning, he's from Arkansas City, Kansas. That was why we were joking about the name there at the beginning of the interview. Wanted to make sure that that was absolutely clear and that you weren't left out there struggling to understand why we were talking about Arkansas and Arkansas City. So many thanks to Doc Yeager for sharing his story on the show this episode. Please do me and Doc a huge favor and share this episode with someone you know who might also find some value in listening to our conversation. Please share this episode with your network and help me spread the good word about the importance of asking more questions and learning how to communicate well. And if you like the conversations with the amazing guests that I have on the show each and every episode, like Doc Yeager, subscribe so that you never miss when a new episode drops. If you ever want to get in touch with me, you can always email me at michael@thefollowupquestion.com, or you can go to michaelashford.com and reach out there. I'll catch you on the next episode of The Follow-Up Question. And until then, keep asking questions.